Good evening and welcome back. Tonight, we're talking about one of the strangest and most famous images in all of folklore. Why do witches ride brooms? Of all the things a witch could fly on, why did people settle on a broom? Was it just a silly idea, or does it come from something much older and much weirder than most people realize? In this story, we will look at medieval beliefs, old superstitions, herbal folklore, and even a bit of misunderstood history that slowly turned an ordinary broom into a symbol of magic. Along the way, we will see how fear, rumor, and imagination combined to create the witch we still picture today, flying across the moonlit sky. As always, I'd love to know where in the world are you listening from, and what time is it for you? Whether you are winding down for the night, or just curious about one of history's oddest questions, thank you for being here. Now, let's begin. A woman kneels on a stone floor and drags a bundle of twigs across the grit. The fire has gone down to coals. Smoke clings to the rafters. A child watches her work from a wooden bench, feet swinging, eyes following the broom head as it scrapes along the seams between stones. Each pass gathers ash, straw, and the black crumbs of yesterday's meal. She tips the debris into a wooden pan and carries it outside. The day keeps moving. Bread needs shaping, water needs hauling, a pot needs scouring. In places like this, across centuries, the broom earns its place as a tool that touches every hour. A broom begins with plants that grow in stubborn soil: heath broom, birch twigs, straw, rushes, whatever a village has nearby and can spare. A stick for a handle, a bundle for the head. Twine, a strip of bark, a length of cord, or a leather thong to bind it tight. Hands do the work. Fingers pinch and twist until the bundle holds its shape. The finished broom leans by the door, ready for the next spill, the next tract in mud, the next drift of ash. People call it different names depending on region and language. In parts of England, besom. Elsewhere, broom, a word that grows from the plant itself. The object stays the same. It belongs to the house. It belongs to the hearth. It belongs to the people who clean up what life leaves behind. Men use brooms too. They sweep barns. They clear threshing floors. They tidy workshops. They brush mud off steps. In the home, though, the broom sits closest to women's work because women spend more hours inside the walls. A household needs constant attention. A floor turns foul fast when animals share a room, when smoke drops soot, when rain brings clay into the doorway, when straw bedding breaks apart. Cleaning becomes routine, and routine becomes identity in the eyes of neighbors. A woman with a broom in her hand looks like order. A woman who keeps her hearth and floor clean looks like competence. People notice. They comment. They judge. In tight communities, small habits become public knowledge. The broom also turns into a marker. A tool left in a certain place tells a story. A broom propped in a doorway can signal that someone is away. A broom set against a wall can show that the floor was swept, that a task was completed, that a home is ready for visitors. In some communities, the broom takes on ceremonial weight. Couples jump a broom in wedding customs meant to mark a threshold. A household uses a broom to sweep out a room before a gathering, clearing the dirt and showing respect. These actions stay physical. A broom moves dust. Feet lift over a handle. Neighbors watch. Memory stores it. The same object moves between labor and ritual because people reuse what they already have. That overlap between daily life and ceremony gives the broom its first shadow. Any item used around thresholds, doors, hearths, and beds picks up stories. Those are the places where people are born, fed, sickened, and buried. A broom stands by the entrance where strangers knock. It leans near the fire where food cooks. It touches the floor where children crawl. It sweeps the area around a bed where someone sweats with fever. If a household believes in charms, the broom becomes part of that practical magic. A family might hang a broom to discourage pests. A mother might place a broom across a doorway to keep a child from wandering out. A household might sweep in a particular pattern out of habit, or because an elder insisted it mattered. None of this requires a devil, a spell book, or a midnight meeting. It requires a community that carries small beliefs like tools in a pocket. The earliest ideas that connect brooms to airborne movement come from human bodies, not from the sky. Villagers dance, they leap, they straddle poles in games, in fertility rites, in seasonal festivals that survive in scraps of record and in later accounts. Picture a field after harvest. The ground is rough with stubble. A bonfire burns. Men and women drink ale from wooden cups. Someone bangs a drum. Someone sings. People form a circle. They jump and shout until their lungs burn. In that kind of night, someone might grab a broom or a staff and ride it as a joke, a dare, or a gesture meant to push luck toward the next crop. A person who jumps while straddling a stick gives a simple illusion. For an instant, both feet leave the ground. The body lifts, the stick points forward. The crowd laughs. Someone swears they saw the rider rise higher than a normal jump. The story grows after the ale runs out. Those moments matter because later authorities take them seriously in the worst way. Churchmen, magistrates, and writers who already fear pagan custom look for symbols to condemn. They fix their attention on common objects because common objects are easy to find. A carved idol can be hidden. A secret book can be burned. A broom stands in every home. Once suspicion attaches to it, no one can claim ignorance. The broom becomes the perfect prop for accusation because it sits within reach of every hand, including the hands of women who have little power to defend themselves. Before any court begins to write about witches on brooms, Europe already carries a heavy load of anxiety about women and household authority. A woman knows herbs because she treats fevers, stomach pains, infected wounds, menstrual trouble, and difficult births. She knows which plant quiets a cough and which plant makes a person vomit. She learns this from older women, from trial and error, from watching animals chew certain leaves, from listening to travelers speak of remedies in other regions. Her neighbors ask her for help because they have few choices. A village might have a priest. It might have a barber surgeon. It rarely has a trained physician. When a child cries through the night with a burning forehead, a mother walks to the woman with the herbs. When a cow stops eating, a farmer asks the same woman to come and look. When a wife bleeds after childbirth, someone runs for her in panic. These are physical scenes, people sweating, hands shaking, a room smelling of smoke, blood, and boiled water. The herbalist arrives with a pouch of dried leaves and a calm voice. She takes over the room because urgency demands it. Her authority creates resentment. Some men resent it. Some women resent it too, especially when they compete for status or resources. If a patient survives, the healer gains credit. If a patient dies, the healer becomes a target. Death comes often in the medieval world. Infection takes people in days. Childbirth kills mothers. Hunger weakens bodies through winter. In that environment, blame becomes a kind of relief. It gives grief a shape. It gives anger a direction. A community that already believes in curses can decide that a death came from malice rather than misfortune. Once that decision sets in, every familiar object in the accused woman's house turns into evidence. A pot becomes a cauldron. A pouch becomes a poison kit. A broom becomes a vehicle for secret travel. The broom's link to women's work tightens this logic. People already associate brooms with female presence in the home. They associate the hearth with women's labor, women's talk, women's discipline, women's disagreements. The broom is visible. It can be described in a sentence. It can be pointed at in a crowded room. A neighbor who wants to accuse someone can say, "I saw her with her broom at an odd hour. I saw her sweeping at night. I saw her leaving her broom by the door." None of these observations prove anything. They sound concrete. They sound ordinary. That is exactly why they work. Courts and communities often prefer the ordinary detail because it gives a confession the feel of real life. In the late medieval world, authorities also build a theory of witchcraft that depends on travel. If witches meet to plot, they need a way to get there. If they harm distant crops, they need a way to reach distant fields. If they gather in secret, they need a way to evade watchful neighbors. Stories already exist about supernatural flight in older folklore. Saints ride clouds in legends. Spirits cross distances in a breath. Dreams carry people through the night. The idea of night travel already lives in human imagination. A broom offers a simple physical anchor for that imagination. It is long. It can be straddled. It looks like a stick horse. It belongs to women. It sits near the door like it is waiting to leave. When fear looks for a vehicle, the broom volunteers itself. The early images of witches riding brooms carry this same mixture of banality and dread. They do not show queens of darkness with jeweled crowns. They show ordinary women in work clothes, headscarves, plain dresses, faces that could belong to anyone's aunt. The broom under them makes the scene feel like a distorted version of daily life. That distortion sharpens the edge. The threat comes from within the village, from within the home, from within the sphere that men often dismiss until it turns dangerous. There is also a private dimension that later confessions drag into the open. Household objects touch bodies. The broom handle is smooth from hands and from use. When authorities begin to claim that witches use ointments and apply them in intimate ways, they weaponize shame. They pull private practices into court language. They force accused women to speak of their bodies under pressure, sometimes under torture, in front of men who have power over them. The broom becomes a tool for humiliation because it is both domestic and phallic in the minds of accusers who fixate on sex. This is one of the darkest engines of the broom myth. It gives interrogators a way to turn a common object into a dirty symbol, and then to present that symbol as proof of evil. In everyday life, none of this needs to be true for the legend to grow. A broom exists in almost every home. That ubiquity does the work. It means any story that uses a broom can travel fast because every listener can picture it. A rumor about a rare artifact dies when people cannot imagine it. A rumor about a broom stays alive because everyone has held one. Everyone knows its weight. Everyone knows how it feels to straddle a stick as a child and pretend it is a horse. A broom carries that childhood play inside it, along with soot and dust. When fear arrives, it borrows the object's familiarity and makes it sinister. The scribe sharpens his quill with a small knife and blows the shavings off the desk. He sits close to a window because winter light fades fast. Outside, the street smells of damp wood and horse manure. Inside, the room smells of ink, parchment, and smoke from a brazier. He copies words that carry a warning. Heresy spreads like an illness, the priest says. Secret meetings happen at night, the priest says. Women speak in those meetings, the priest says. And men listen to them. The scribe keeps his head down and writes. He has learned how quickly the wrong idea turns into a charge, and how quickly a charge turns into a sentence. On the edge of the page, The illuminator sketches figures that look like people he has passed in the market. A woman with a headscarf, a woman with a plain dress, a woman with a broom under her legs. The first broom riders in the record do not arrive as characters in a children's tale. They arrive as suspects. In 15th century Europe, the church fights older religious practices, local folk customs, and organized dissent. Reform movements grow in pockets across the continent. Some are quiet and some are loud. Some try to simplify worship. Some reject church authority. Some allow women a voice that parish life rarely grants. Authorities label these groups with names that stick. Then they attach those names to charges that terrify the public. The Waldensians are one such group. Their opponents call them witches and devil worshippers in pamphlets and sermons, and the accusation spreads. A label like that does not need solid evidence to cause harm. It needs repetition. It needs a few witnesses who fear punishment and want to survive. It needs a court that treats confession as truth and treats refusal as proof of guilt. A manuscript from the middle of the 15th century contains an image that becomes a seed. A woman sits astride a broom, and another sits astride a stick. The figures wear ordinary clothing, the kind that signals modesty and poverty. The scene links women, heresy, and illicit movement in a single picture. It carries a warning that lands in the eye before it lands in the mind. The woman looks like a neighbor. The broom looks like a household tool. The idea that she might ride it through the air lands with a jolt because the object stays familiar. The picture does not need to explain itself. Viewers fill in the rest with whatever they already fear about secret meetings and unruly women. A page like that travels among clerics and educated elites. Then fragments of its ideas drift down into common talk. Talk changes faster than doctrine. In villages, people trade stories at wells and ovens and taverns. They trade stories while they mend nets and spin wool. A rumor about a woman seen outside after dark attaches to a rumor about herbs. A rumor about herbs attaches to a rumor about sickness. Then someone mentions a broom left leaning in a strange place. The broom becomes a detail that makes the story feel true. A peasant does not need a theological treatise. A peasant needs a picture in the head. A broom rider provides that picture. The story spreads because it feels concrete. People can describe it in a few sentences. They can argue about whether it happened. They can laugh while repeating it, then fall silent when the wrong person walks into the room. Authorities learn how to use these stories. They build an image of witchcraft that depends on meetings, travel, and conspiracy. A witch who stays home does not fit their model. A witch who rides out to a Sabbath does. The Sabbath itself serves a purpose. It turns scattered fears into a single event. It makes witchcraft sound organized. It makes it sound like a rival church. It gives prosecutors a structure for interrogation. It gives judges a structure for verdicts. A suspect who can be forced to say, "I went to the meeting, and I saw these people there," becomes a tool for mass arrest. A suspect who can be forced to say, "I traveled through the air," becomes a spectacle. Spectacle matters because it draws attention and builds support for persecution. It turns the audience into accomplices. The broom becomes useful because it gives flight a prop that everyone already understands. In the middle of the 15th century, trials begin to collect these details. The broom rider appears in confessions, and those confessions appear under pressure. Courts use confinement, threats, and torture. They use isolation. They use sleep deprivation. They use the fear of fire. A prisoner learns fast that silence earns harsher treatment. A prisoner learns that agreement brings relief. When an interrogator asks, "How did you travel?" the prisoner looks for the answer that matches the interrogator's expectation. The interrogator has heard stories. The interrogator has read pamphlets. The interrogator has a priest whispering nearby about devils and pacts. The interrogator offers the suspect the words to say. The suspect repeats them. The scribe writes them down. The page becomes evidence. The evidence becomes precedent. The precedent becomes a script that other interrogators follow. A priest named Guillaume Edelin becomes a case that later writers cannot stop repeating. He stands in a courtroom in France in the 1450 seconds, surrounded by officials who treat dissent as danger. Edelin has criticized witch trials, and that alone makes him a threat to those who run them. He also has enemies who benefit from his fall. The proceedings grind forward. Questions turn into accusations. Accusations turn into demands for confession. Under torture, Edelin says he used an ointment. He says he anointed a stick. He says he rode it. The details change in retellings, but the structure stays. Ointment, staff or broom, flight. The structure fits what authorities want. It fits what the public finds horrifying. It also fits what later artists can draw in a single frame. A man or woman on a broom, lifting away from a roofline, gives a clean silhouette. The image does the work that 1,000 pages of court language cannot. Printing accelerates this process. As the 15th century ends and the 16th begins, woodcuts and broadsheets turn witch stories into mass media. A printer can carve a simple scene into a block and press it again and again. The details do not need to match any specific case. They need to match the public's expectation. A witch rides a broom. A devil waits nearby. A cauldron boils. A village burns. A mother cries. People buy the sheet, pin it to a wall, talk about it with their neighbors, and carry it to the next town. The broom rider becomes a standard image, as recognizable as a crown on a king. When fear has a standard image, fear becomes easier to sell. The broom rider also serves as a way to police women in public space. A woman who moves freely already draws attention in many communities. A woman who walks alone at night draws suspicion. A woman who lives outside a household controlled by a husband or adult son draws suspicion. A widow draws suspicion. A midwife draws suspicion. A healer draws suspicion. A poor woman who argues with neighbors draws suspicion. When prosecutors and priests describe witches, they describe women whose lives already sit on the margins. The broom does something important here. It turns those women into agents. It turns them into people who can act with speed and reach. A village that feels powerless in the face of disease, failed harvests, and war can accept the idea that someone nearby has secret power. Secret power makes an event feel explainable. It also makes punishment feel meaningful. Religious conflict feeds this hunger for explanation. Europe in this period holds tension like dry wood holds heat. The church faces criticism. Reform movements split communities. Wars reshape borders. Plague returns in waves. Families watch children die in a single week. People search for causes. They also search for scapegoats. Priests and magistrates provide scapegoats because scapegoats protect authority. A witch who rides a broom to a Sabbath provides an enemy that can be hunted. That enemy also supports sermons about obedience, sexuality, and proper behavior. The witch becomes the example used to scare the faithful into conformity. The broom becomes the marker of her crime because it belongs to domestic life, the very sphere that moral teaching tries to control. The charges also become more explicit about sex, and the broom sits at the center of that ugliness. Interrogators ask about pacts with devils. They ask about physical acts. They ask about bodies. They ask questions designed to humiliate. The broom handle appears in these accounts as an object of shame and power. A prosecutor can describe a broom and force an accused woman to talk about it in front of men. He can put her on a bench, bind her wrists, and keep pressing until she repeats his words. The record then preserves the humiliation. The record travels. It turns into a story that people tell with a grin and then with a gasp. It turns into a warning used against other women. The broom rider becomes a figure of uncontrolled female sexuality in the minds of those who want control. That association spreads through the same channels as everything else: sermons, pamphlets, tavern talk, and courtroom theatre. At the same time, the image remains stubbornly ordinary. That is the part that makes it stick. A noble woman on a gilded horse looks distant. A poor woman on a broom looks close. The closeness creates unease. A household can lock its door against bandits. It cannot lock its mind against the thought that the woman who borrowed salt last week might ride past the chimney tonight. The chimney itself becomes part of the staging. Houses have chimneys. Houses have roofs. People already imagine smoke leaving the chimney and rising. That vertical movement becomes an easy mental bridge to flight. Artists draw witches leaving through chimneys because it makes a strong picture. Viewers accept it because they have watched smoke move that way since childhood. There is a practical detail that plays a role in the background. Rural communities store brooms near the hearth because the hearth provides heat and keeps tools dry. A broom by a fireplace stays within reach. A broom handle may end up darkened by soot. A visitor sees it leaning near the fire and thinks nothing of it. Later, when suspicion spreads, that same broom becomes a clue in retrospect. People begin to reinterpret objects. That habit drives witch panic more than any single event. Once a community decides someone is dangerous, every ordinary choice becomes part of the case. Why did she keep her broom there? Why did she sweep at that hour? Why did she leave it outside? Why did she carry it to the field? None of these acts are crimes. Under fear, they become evidence. Courts in this period also rely on spectacle. A trial draws crowds. People want to see the accused. People want to hear the accusations. Some come out of genuine fear. Some come out of boredom. Some come because they want to confirm their suspicions. A confession that includes broom flight provides entertainment and moral reinforcement at the same time. It gives the crowd an image to carry home. It also gives them a sense of participation. They watched the sinner exposed. They watched authority restore order. They leave with a story that confirms what they already believed. The broom rider then becomes a piece of folklore that feels official because it came from a court record, even when it came from torture. In some regions, accusations also track social conflict. A dispute over a boundary, a debt, a broken promise, a dead animal, or a failed batch of beer can end in an accusation. The accused woman may have used a broom in the course of the dispute, sweeping a doorstep, cleaning a stall, working in a tavern. A neighbor can point to that broom and turn it into a symbol of the woman's supposed power. A story about flight sounds extreme, and extreme stories can overwhelm mundane facts. The accuser does not need proof of flight. The accuser needs a community ready to believe that the accused carries hidden abilities. Once that readiness exists, the broom works like a flag. Some intellectuals and clerics argue about the nature of witch flight. They debate whether it happens in the body or in the mind. Some claim devils carry witches through the air. Some claim witches imagine it in dreams. These debates still end up serving persecution because the accused remains guilty under either theory. The debate gives prosecutors a way to sound educated while still burning people. It also gives writers new ways to describe the same scene. A broom rider can be portrayed as physically flying or spiritually traveling. The public rarely cares about the distinction. The public cares about the picture of a woman breaking the rules of nature and society, leaving her house without permission, and meeting others in secret. That picture feeds fear and keeps it alive. A girl grows up in this world hearing the stories before she understands them. She hears them in half sentences. She hears them as jokes. She hears them as threats whispered during arguments. She hears them when adults warn her to avoid certain houses. She watches women sweep and she watches men watch them. She learns which women receive smiles and which women receive narrowed eyes. She learns that a broom can be a tool and a symbol at the same time. She learns that symbols can kill. A boy grows up learning a similar lesson. He learns that female knowledge can be framed as danger. He learns that the home can be treated as a battlefield in moral teaching. He learns that a woman who steps outside expected behavior becomes a target. The broom rider becomes the shorthand for all of it. By the time the broomstick witch becomes a common figure in European imagination, the image rests on a foundation built by courts, printing, religious conflict, and local grudges. It also rests on a simple physical fact. A broom looks like something a person can straddle. Children already do it in play. Adults already saw people do it in festival games. Once authorities decide that witches travel to secret meetings, the broom offers itself as the simplest vehicle. It stays in the corner of the house, the most ordinary object in the room, waiting for someone to claim it carries a person into the night. A woman sits at a rough wooden table with a candle stub pushed into a blob of wax. The flame shakes each time the door opens. On the table, she lays out dried leaves, seeds, and small roots on a flat board. She sorts them by smell and texture. She keeps some in cloth packets tied with string. She keeps others in a clay jar sealed with fat. Her hands move in practiced motions. She pinches a leaf, rubs it between her fingers, and brings it to her nose. She spits a bit of bitter root into her palm and wipes it away with the edge of her apron. This work happens in kitchens and sheds across Europe for centuries. It happens because people get sick and because doctors are scarce and expensive. It also happens because knowledge passes through women more often than courts admit. A mother teaches a daughter which plant calms a cough. A midwife teaches an apprentice how to boil water and keep cloth clean. A healer learns how much of a herb is safe by watching what happens when someone takes too much. The difference between relief and poison sits in the size of a pinch. A court looks at that table and sees a crime. A magistrate hears about jars and packets and decides the jars hold curses. A priest hears the names of plants and decides the names belong to the devil. When a village falls into fear, ordinary remedies get retold as dark recipes. The accusation pulls medicine into the language of sorcery because it makes a clear villain. It also gives officials a reason to intervene in private life. They can search a house. They can question a woman about what she keeps in her cupboard. They can treat her knowledge as a threat to public order. Once that shift happens, the broom begins to sit beside the pot and the pouch as part of a single story. The story says the woman uses herbs to change her body and then uses the broom to travel. That story does not grow from careful observation. It grows from interrogation. The pattern appears early. In 1324, a noble household in Ireland falls into scandal and bloodshed. Lady Alice Keiteler stands at the center of it. She has married multiple times. She has money. She has property. She has enemies who want what she has. When her fourth husband falls ill and dies, suspicion tightens around her like a rope. The charges against her pile up. They include poison. They include heresy. They include dealings with a demon. Investigators claim they find a powder and an ointment. The language in the records turns domestic objects into evidence. A small pipe or container becomes proof of secret practice. A wooden staff becomes proof of travel. The story says she greased a staff and rode it at night. The claim enters the archive and stays there. Keiteler escapes. She flees before the court can bind her. Her servant, Petronilla de Meath, has no escape. Petronilla is questioned. She is beaten. She is forced to speak. She becomes the body the court can punish in place of the body that slipped away. She is executed. The crowd watches a woman burn and learns a lesson about power. The lesson has a second layer. The lesson says a woman who knows too much and lives outside a man's control can pull everyone into danger. These early cases matter because they show the basic mechanics. Officials look for an object that can carry the accusation. Ointment serves that purpose. It sits on the edge between medicine and poison. People already accept that salves can change the body. A salve can stop pain. A salve can ease a rash. A salve can warm skin. It becomes easy to accept that another salve can do something stranger. When fear meets an ointment, fear supplies the result. A prosecutor asks, "What did you put in it?" A suspect names plants she has used for years. The prosecutor writes the names down as ingredients of evil. A judge hears that list and imagines a recipe book. The crowd hears that list and repeats it with new details. Soon the ointment becomes the hinge between the broom on the wall and the flight in the story. The plants most often mentioned in these accounts are plants with real effects. Henbane, belladonna, mandrake, hemlock, thornapple, and other members of a rough family of dangerous herbs grow in fields, along roads, and at the edge of gardens. They smell sharp. They taste bitter. They can kill. They can also sedate. They can dry the mouth, blur vision, race the heart, and flood a person with confusion. A healer learns to fear them and to respect them. She knows that a small amount can dull pain. She knows that a larger amount can drop a person into a deep sleep. She knows that a careless dose can stop breathing. This is practical knowledge. It comes from bodies and mistakes. It also comes from desperation. If a person screams with toothache, people will try anything. If a person thrashes with fever, people will try anything. When a community lacks reliable medicine, risky plants get used anyway. In court records and later witch-hunting manuals, these plants show up in a more extreme role. Writers claim witches use them in an ointment that allows flight. The claim often includes a specific method. The ointment gets rubbed onto a stick, a staff, or a broom. Sometimes the confession claims the ointment gets applied to the skin. Sometimes the confession uses explicit language about application to intimate areas. These details serve a purpose in the courtroom. They push the accused into shame. They give the interrogator control. They also make the story vivid for listeners. Vivid stories spread. A confession that sounds boring does not travel far. A confession with sex, ointment, and flight travels fast. There is also a plain pharmacological reason why the story of flight appears so often once these plants enter the narrative. When tropane alkaloids enter the body, a person can experience disorientation so intense that the mind loses the usual sense of place. The person may feel as if they are moving when they lie still. The person may see scenes that feel real. The person may experience bodily sensations that seem physical. These are hallucinations and delusions built from the brain under stress. People in the medieval and early modern world rarely have a framework to describe drug-induced hallucination as a chemical event. They describe it as a spiritual event. They describe it as a dream sent by devils or spirits. They describe it as a journey. If a person under that influence later tries to explain what happened, flight becomes a workable word. It matches the sensation of movement. It matches the social stories already circulating. It fits the interrogator's script. A doctor in the 16th century, Andrés de Laguna, provides one of the clearest examples of the gap between lived experience and interpretation. He hears about witch ointments and decides to test one. He describes a case in which a woman is rubbed with a salve and then falls into a long sleep. When she wakes, she insists she has enjoyed great pleasures and becomes angry when told it was a drug-induced state. Her anger is a physical scene. She lashes out. She complains. She believes her experience was real. Laguna looks at the same scene and sees a chemical reaction. He sees a body that absorbed a plant compound and entered a delirium. He concludes that the sensation of flight and the sensation of erotic encounter can be products of the substance itself. His conclusion does not end witch trials. Courts rarely adjust their procedures based on a physician's doubt. The public also prefers a moral story over a medical one. A moral story assigns blame. A medical story assigns chance and biology. The same pattern plays out again and again in witch trial testimony. An accused person is questioned about nighttime travel. The accused person describes it in the language available to them. Some speak of dreams. Some speak of being carried. Some speak of riding. The interrogator presses for details that match the theory of the Sabbath. The interrogator asks, "How did you get there?" The accused person, exhausted and frightened, chooses the most recognizable vehicle in her home: a broom, a staff, a pitchfork, a familiar object. This choice then becomes a stable detail in the written record. The record becomes a template used in later trials. The template pushes future confessions toward the same detail. Over time, broom flight becomes less an observation and more a required answer. The mechanics of interrogation matter here because they shape the reality that later generations inherit. A confession extracted under torture is rarely a free narrative. It is a negotiation for survival. A prisoner watches what makes the interrogator satisfied. The prisoner learns that the interrogator wants certain features. The interrogator wants a pact. The interrogator wants a devil. The interrogator wants a meeting. The interrogator wants names of accomplices. The interrogator wants proof of flight. The prisoner provides these features because pain and fear narrow the mind to one goal: getting the questions to stop. The prisoner does not need to believe the story for the story to end up on the page. The scribe records it anyway. The record then enters the system as truth because the legal system treats confession as the highest proof. Women in these courts often face a second layer of vulnerability. They sit in front of men who control their bodies and their futures. Many are poor. Many have no education. Many have no advocate who will risk angering authorities. Their social position already makes them easy targets. When they confess, they use the material of their own lives. They mention a broom because a broom stands in their house. They mention an ointment because they have used salves for ordinary problems. They mention a pot because they cook. They mention a bundle of herbs because they dry herbs for tea and for poultices. In that way, their daily labor becomes the raw material of the accusation. The court takes the visible world of a woman's life and rearranges it into a story of evil. Some cases include details that suggest a real practice beneath the hysteria. Folk healers did create salves and tinctures. Some were meant to relieve pain. Some were used as sedatives. Some were used in reproductive contexts to induce menstruation or miscarriage, to ease childbirth, to reduce bleeding. Those uses sit close to taboo and fear. Male authorities often respond to female control over reproduction with obsession and panic. When a midwife has the ability to influence pregnancy outcomes, she holds power that men in church and state want to regulate. If a woman is suspected of using herbs to cause infertility or miscarriage, the accusation can slide quickly into witchcraft. Once witchcraft enters, the same herb knowledge becomes a weapon in the story. The ointment turns into flying ointment because it provides a dramatic result. There is also the question of application. Some historical accounts suggest that these salves were sometimes applied to skin areas where absorption is faster. That can include mucous membranes. It can include the armpit and groin. Such application can deliver a strong effect without swallowing the substance, which reduces nausea and makes dosing more controllable. A practitioner who learns this through experience might treat it as practical technique. A court treats it as indecency. A pamphlet writer treats it as proof of depravity. The same act becomes different things depending on who holds the pen. In the hands of witch hunters, it becomes pornographic detail used to inflame disgust. Once the idea of flying ointment spreads, it changes how people interpret normal sickness and normal behavior. A woman who becomes delirious from fever might babble about movement, voices, lights, and strange meetings. Her family might already fear witchcraft. Neighbors might already whisper about her. A priest might already preach about devils in the night. When she says she flew, the statement sticks. It might begin as fever talk. It ends as testimony. The same happens with substances. If someone steals or discovers a jar of ointment in a suspect's house, they might smear it on an animal, on a tool, or on a person out of fear or curiosity. If the substance contains psychoactive plants, the person might experience delirium. Then the community receives a vivid story that seems confirmed by experiment. The cycle feeds itself. The broom's role becomes clearer here. A broom is long and smooth enough to be treated like a staff. It is also associated with the hearth and with women. In the logic of witch hunters, that makes it ideal. They want an object that links the accused woman to both domestic space and transgressive movement. The broom provides that link. The broom also provides plausible deniability within the story. A woman can leave her house holding a broom and no one asks why. She can walk to a barn to sweep. She can go to a neighbor's house to help clean after sickness. She can carry it along a lane without drawing attention. That normality becomes a cloak in the imagination. The story says she hides her secret travel in plain sight. That detail makes the story satisfyingly sinister to people who already suspect deception. Court records sometimes describe witches riding sticks, forks, poles, and animals. The broom eventually dominates because it has a clear identity. It shows up in art. It shows up in satire. It shows up in sermons. It belongs to women's labor in a way that a random pole does not. When a storyteller wants to signal witchcraft fast, a broom does it in a single beat. The icon grows through repetition. Ointment helps lock it in place because ointment provides the mechanism. A broom without a mechanism is just a stick. A broom with ointment becomes a device. That is how the myth gains internal logic. The logic sounds crude, yet it satisfies the mind's desire for cause and effect. Rub the broom. Mount it. Fly. This period also produces a class of writers who act like prosecutors on paper. They compile tales, confessions, and theories into manuals. They claim to describe how witchcraft works. They list ingredients. They list rituals. They list signs. They pretend to offer certainty. Their certainty becomes a tool for institutions. A judge with doubts can lean on a manual. A priest with doubts can preach from a manual. A neighbor with doubts can borrow the manual's language to accuse. The manual creates a shared script. Once the script includes ointment and flight, those elements become expected features in future cases. Even a suspect who has never heard of flying ointment may learn about it during questioning, when an interrogator describes it as if it is already known. The bodies involved in these cases pay the cost. A woman is arrested. She is kept in a cell that smells of urine and damp straw. Her wrists are bound. Her hair is cut. Her skin is searched for marks. She is questioned for hours. She is shown instruments. She is promised relief if she speaks. She is threatened with pain if she refuses. She begins to say whatever will end the session. She names herbs she recognizes. She describes an ointment. She describes a dream. The interrogator turns the dream into a journey. The interrogator turns the ointment into a magical fuel. The interrogator suggests the broom. The woman repeats the broom. The scribe writes. A verdict follows. In many regions, that verdict ends in execution. There is an irony in the way chemistry sits inside this cruelty. The same plants that courts frame as tools of evil also exist in the wider medical world. Physicians and apothecaries use dangerous substances in controlled ways. They prescribe opiates. They use belladonna in tiny amounts for certain conditions. They bleed patients. They purge them. They give them compounds that can harm as much as they heal. When a learned man uses a drug, the act can be framed as medicine. When a poor woman uses a drug, the act can be framed as witchcraft. That difference is not based on chemistry. It is based on status, gender, and institutional authority. The broom rider myth thrives in that gap because it sits on the border between knowledge and permission. It punishes those who practice outside approved structures. In some places, the story of flight begins to shift as skepticism grows among certain elites. Some argue that devils deceive women through dreams. Some argue that the body remains in bed while the mind wanders. This argument still condemns the accused because it frames the experience as sinful and voluntary. It also keeps the broom in play. A dream still needs an image. The broom can exist as a dream vehicle. That allows authorities to keep the icon while adjusting the explanation. The icon matters more than the physics. The icon keeps the public afraid. It also keeps the public entertained. A printer sets a fresh sheet of paper onto the press bed and checks the edges with his fingertips. The shop smells of ink, damp paper, and hot metal from a small stove. An apprentice rolls ink onto a carved woodblock, and the printer lowers the platen with a practiced pull. When he lifts it again, a picture appears in reverse, and then in truth. A woman rides a broom through the night sky. Her skirt flares around her knees. A small animal clings close to her. Below her, rooftops tilt at sharp angles, and a chimney juts up like a finger. The image dries on a rack beside other sheets. There are words, too, set in cramped type, describing a confession, a meeting, a pact, and a punishment. The printer does not argue with the content. He counts coins. He stacks pages. Fear sells well. By the 16th century, witch hunting has moved beyond local grudges and parish gossip. It becomes a system that repeats across regions. Courts develop routines. Clergy develop language. Town councils develop procedures for arrest, imprisonment, and execution. The broom rides along in this machinery because it fits the new need for a clear public image. The accused often come from the edges of the social order. Widows, servants, midwives, beggars, women who live alone, women who speak sharply, women who sell herbs, women who have few protectors. When authorities drag them into court, the charge rarely stays small. It expands into a complete story. That story includes travel, because travel suggests planning and coordination. A witch who can move quickly becomes a threat to multiple households, multiple farms, and multiple parishes. When a judge wants to convince a crowd that execution is necessary, he benefits from a narrative that sounds organized and dangerous. The broom rider provides that. People already know the shape of a broom. People already know what it looks like leaning by a door. When they hear that a woman used that object to leave her house and meet others in secret, the familiar shape turns into a weapon in the mind. A courtroom in a market town runs on physical routine. Guards walk prisoners in with their wrists bound. A clerk sits with ink and paper. A magistrate sits elevated behind a table. A priest stands nearby and watches faces in the crowd. Witnesses step forward and point. They describe quarrels. They describe dead livestock. They describe a child who wasted away after a fever. They describe butter that refused to form. They describe ale that turned sour. Each detail lands as a small stone, and the pile grows. Then the questions shift. The magistrate asks about meetings at night. He asks about leaving the house. He asks about roads and crossroads. He asks about barns, fields, and lonely places. The accused woman may answer in fragments. She may cry. She may refuse. She may beg. The magistrate presses until the answers resemble the story he expects. He asks how she traveled. She mentions a stick, a staff, or a broom, because that is what she owns and what the question seems to require. The clerk writes the words down as if they arrived clean and voluntary. The crowd hears the phrase and repeats it when they leave. By the time the day ends, the town has a new piece of gossip, and the gossip now carries the stamp of the court. The broom also gains a stage through public punishment. Executions happen in daylight, in open fields, or near the edge of town where many can gather. People bring children. They buy bread and beer from vendors. They climb wagons or stand on barrels to see better. Officials read charges aloud. Sometimes a condemned person speaks. Sometimes she remains silent. The sentence ends with fire, hanging, or beheading depending on local law and custom. The crowd watches the body struggle, then stop. Afterward, people talk about what they saw. Some feel relief. Some feel excitement. Some feel sick. Many feel a hard satisfaction that order has been restored. In that talk, the details of confession become as important as the death itself. A broom flight confession gives the crowd something easy to repeat. It also gives them an image they can hold on to. A woman leaving a chimney or rising above a field. The execution confirms the story in the mind of anyone who already feared witches. A person who doubts may keep quiet, because doubt can invite suspicion. Chimneys become a key part of the broom image because chimneys sit at the center of household life. A chimney marks a home from a distance. It also marks a home from inside, because it draws smoke and smell upward. People watch smoke lift every day. They watch sparks climb. They watch soot gather. They sweep ash from the hearth with small brooms and brushes. Artists and pamphlet makers use this because it is easy to draw and easy to understand. A chimney provides a clean vertical line. A witch on a broom provides a clean diagonal. Put them together and the image reads instantly. This is one reason the chimney departure appears so often in prints and paintings. The public recognizes the parts. The public supplies the motion in the mind. The story gains force even when trial records show far fewer literal chimney departures than later folklore suggests. The printed image ends up shaping memory more than testimony. Painters contribute too. In the Low Countries and elsewhere, artists fill scenes with devils, cauldrons, and flying figures. A viewer can stand in front of a print and point at the broom riders. The viewer can laugh, then look again and feel uneasy. A picture gives people permission to imagine witches as a real category of person, not just a rumor about a neighbor. The image also standardizes details. The broom becomes the default vehicle, even when local stories used other objects. The witch becomes old, then sometimes young. Her hair becomes wild. Her face becomes sharp. An animal appears beside her, a cat, a toad, a hare. These visual habits spread because artists copy each other and because buyers want what feels familiar. Over time, the broom rider turns into a stock figure. When people see a broom leaning by a door, they can now see two things at once. They see a cleaning tool. They also see the outline from the print, a woman rising above a roof. This is also the period when professional witch hunting takes shape in some regions. Some authorities appoint men to seek out suspects, gather testimony, and pressure confessions. These men travel from village to village and apply a method. They ask the same questions. They watch reactions. They look for conflicts that can be turned into charges. They focus on households already under strain. A poor family with debt becomes vulnerable. A widow who relies on charity becomes vulnerable. A woman who asks for food and gets refused becomes vulnerable, because the refusal can lead to guilt if misfortune follows. If a cow dies after an argument, The owner wants a cause. A witch hunter supplies it. He tells the owner that witchcraft works through spite and envy. He tells the owner to remember every odd moment, every harsh word, every look. The owner now reviews his life like a ledger and picks out anything that can support the charge. He might remember a broom in a corner. He might remember seeing the woman carrying it at dusk. He might remember her sweeping outside when the air felt strange. The witch hunter writes it down. The detail gains a place in the official story. Witch trials also depend on chains of accusation. A frightened prisoner names others because naming others can reduce pressure, delay execution, or satisfy interrogators. A named person is arrested, questioned, and pushed to confess. That second person names more. Soon the whole village is caught in a net. In that environment, confession becomes a currency. People offer details that sound convincing. Details about brooms sound convincing because brooms exist everywhere. A prisoner can say she saw another woman leave on a broom because the listener already knows what that looks like in the mind. A prisoner can say she met others at night because night meetings already exist for ordinary reasons. For lovers, for thieves, for neighbors who want privacy. The court merges ordinary behavior with the charged story. People who survive often do so by aligning their words with what the court expects. People who refuse can face harsher pressure. As the machinery runs, the broom rider becomes more common in records, and the records then become proof for the next court. Writers who claim expertise add another layer. They compile cases, rumors, and theological claims into books that promise clarity. Judges and clergy use these texts as references, and the texts then influence how interrogations proceed. The books describe how witches travel, what they do at meetings, and what signs reveal them. The books often include the broom, the ointment, and the Sabbath, because these details make the story vivid. A vivid story helps a judge persuade himself that he is acting for the good of the community. It helps a priest persuade a congregation that harsh measures are justified. It also helps local officials justify spending money on prisons, guards, and executions. Once a bureaucratic machine forms around witch hunting, the machine needs a steady supply of cases. The broom rider story supports that supply because it makes witchcraft sound active and urgent. Within households, the broom becomes a site of fear in small gestures. A woman notices her neighbor's broom left outside and thinks about rumors. A man walks past a doorway and sees a broom leaning at an angle and thinks about a pamphlet he read. A child hears adults mention broom flight and begins to look at chimneys with suspicion. A family in a tense village might even hide their brooms or keep them out of view, though the work still needs doing. People keep sweeping. They keep cleaning stalls and floors. The fear does not remove the broom from life. It changes the meaning people attach to it. A tool becomes a symbol, and symbols can pull people into violence. The legal process rewards the kind of speech that fits the script. When a witness says, "I saw her ride a broom," the witness gains attention. The statement sounds specific. It sounds like a scene. It can be repeated. A witness who says, "I dislike her," or "I argued with her," offers less. Courts often prefer a dramatic claim that reaches beyond ordinary conflict. That preference encourages further dramatic claims. It also encourages the accused to confess in dramatic terms, because drama signals compliance with the interrogator's worldview. Once the broom becomes established in that worldview, it becomes a reliable element to include. The broom rider confession becomes a ritual. It functions as a passage in the interrogation, a key that unlocks the next stage, the naming of accomplices, the description of meetings, the description of devils, the description of harm. The broom becomes a narrative hinge that turns domestic life into conspiracy. Across Europe, these patterns vary by region, law, and religious leadership. Yet the broad effect remains. The broom rider image spreads farther than any single court. It crosses borders through printed sheets, traveling preachers, soldiers, merchants, and displaced families. A traveler carries a story from one town to another. A preacher repeats it in a sermon. A local official uses it to justify a new round of arrests. By the time large parts of Europe begin to pull back from the worst witch panics, the broom rider has already hardened into folklore. It is also hardened into art and popular entertainment. The picture persists even when some judges and scholars begin to question the reality of physical flight. The picture persists because it is useful. It gives people a clear enemy. It also gives them a clear story to tell. A town crier stands in a square with a paper in his hand and reads aloud. The crowd shifts and murmurs. Names come out one by one. Some listeners cross themselves. Some stare at the ground. Some exchange looks that carry old grudges. The crier reads the charges in the same tone he uses for taxes and lost livestock. The flatness of his voice makes the content feel official, routine, settled. The story of a broom ride becomes part of civic life, as ordinary in the public ear as a regulation about market weights. That is the moment when myth turns into public record in the mind of the community. A broom leaning in a corner can now carry the full force of law and punishment because law has spent decades teaching people what to see when they look at it. A woman stands at the edge of a crowded room with a broom in her hand because she arrived early and the floor looked bad. Mud has dried in ridges near the door. Straw and ash cling to the corners. She works in short strokes, pulling the dirt into a pile, then pushing it into a pan. Men sit at a table behind her and talk without lowering their voices. They talk about prices, about a sick cow, about a neighbor who refuses to pay a debt. Someone laughs. Someone spits into the rushes. The woman keeps sweeping. When she finishes, she leans the broom against the wall and goes to the hearth to stir a pot. Later, when arguments break out and someone needs a target, her broom becomes part of the story people tell about her. They say she always has it in her hand. They say she always stands at thresholds. They say she watches who comes in and who goes out. The broom stays visible. Visibility turns into suspicion when a community decides it needs a villain. Across early modern Europe, the broom sits inside a larger fight over who gets to hold authority inside a household. The household is where food is stored, money is hidden, children are raised, and labor is organized. Women manage much of that work. They decide how long flour will last. They decide when to sell eggs. They decide how to stretch a stew. They decide which child gets an extra piece of bread on a cold day. They also manage information. They know who has been sick. They know who is pregnant. They know who is short on fuel. They know which husband drinks too much. These facts move through a village like smoke from a hearth, and women often carry them. When a society feels stable, that informal authority can sit alongside the formal authority of men. When a society feels threatened, informal authority becomes a problem. Officials prefer order that runs through channels they control: church, court, guild, and household headed by a man. Women who hold influence outside those channels draw attention. The broom, as the simplest sign of women's domestic role, becomes a tool for accusing a woman of stepping beyond her place. Work that keeps people alive also creates opportunities for conflict. Brewing is one example. In many towns and villages, women brew ale for their households and sometimes for sale. Brewing requires grain, a large pot, water, and time. It also requires trust, because buyers cannot judge quality until they drink. A woman who sells ale can earn cash. She can lend small sums. She can refuse to extend credit. She can support herself after a husband dies. She can compete with male brewers when markets and guild rules shift. People watching these changes find ways to interpret them as moral threats. A broom outside a door can serve as a simple sign that ale is available, the way a shop sign announces a trade. If a town begins to resent the woman who sells ale, the sign outside her door becomes a prop in the story. She stands near a threshold. She takes money. She argues with customers. She keeps a cat to catch mice near stored grain. She uses herbs to flavor or preserve. Those are ordinary features of the work. Under suspicion, they become ingredients of a charge. The broom as a sign of ale becomes the broom as a sign of witchcraft. The shift happens through gossip, resentment, and the desire to discipline women who earn money. Midwives and healers face a sharper danger because they enter the most vulnerable rooms. A midwife arrives when a woman is screaming in labor, sweat on her face, hair stuck to her neck, hands clamped onto the bed frame. The midwife washes her hands. She warms cloth. She checks the mother's breathing. She gives instructions to women in the room. She may send a man to fetch more water. She may send a child to heat stones. She makes decisions fast. If the birth goes well, families thank her. If the mother bleeds, if the child comes still, if infection follows, grief looks for a cause. In communities that already accept witchcraft as a working explanation, suspicion can land on the person who touched the body and gave orders. A midwife also knows plants that affect the body, and that knowledge creates more fear. Courts and clergy often treat female control over reproduction as dangerous. A broom, again, becomes a symbol that links the woman to the home and to the private acts that men want to regulate. A prosecutor can describe the broom as a tool of household order and then twist it into a tool of household sabotage. The same prosecutor can claim that the woman used the broom to travel to secret meetings. The story makes her sound organized and predatory. It turns her practical work into conspiracy. Property disputes push the same pattern. A widow who inherits land or a house becomes an object of interest. Neighbors watch her decisions. Officials watch her payments. Relatives watch her boundaries. A widow might refuse to remarry. She might take in a lodger. She might rent part of her land. She might sell goods in the market. Those actions can trigger resentment because they challenge expectations. If she is sharp with words, if she refuses charity, if she demands what is owed, she becomes easier to frame as spiteful. People in debt to her want her quiet. People competing with her want her weakened. When misfortune hits, a sick child, a failed crop, a dead pig, the rumor can form. The rumor can travel fast because it serves interests. A broom leaning by her door becomes a convenient detail. It allows a witness to describe her in a simple sentence. She stood there with her broom. She watched me. She muttered. She left. That detail becomes the kind of thing a court clerk can write down, and the written down detail acquires authority. These accusations take shape through specific actions in specific places. A woman asks for milk. A neighbor refuses. The woman leaves angry. A week later, the neighbor's cow stops producing. The neighbor thinks about the argument. The neighbor asks others if they have trouble too. Someone suggests the angry woman. The neighbor tells the story again, and this time the story includes more detail. The woman stood at my threshold. The woman held a broom. The woman looked past me into the house. The neighbor repeats the story to a local official. The official asks questions. The official suggests answers. The official wants the story to fit a known pattern. The pattern includes a curse, a quarrel, a mark, and a meeting. The broom slides in because it sits in the same domestic space where the quarrel began. Once a case moves into court, the broom becomes part of a larger set of symbols used to paint the accused as disorderly and threatening. The woman's voice becomes evidence against her. Her anger becomes evidence. Her poverty becomes evidence. Her independence becomes evidence. Men also face witchcraft accusations, yet the broom rider image stays tied to women because the broom is tied to women's labor in the public mind. That connection makes the broom rider story useful in sermons about proper behavior. A preacher can stand in a church and describe a woman who should have stayed by her hearth and instead rides out at night. The preacher can connect that to sin, to sexuality, to disobedience, and to the breakdown of household discipline. Listeners carry that message into everyday interactions. They watch women's behavior more closely. They interpret disagreements as threats. The broom becomes a warning sign. It is a short step from saying a woman keeps a dirty house to saying she keeps a dangerous house. It is a short step from saying she sweeps at odd hours to saying she sweeps away blessings from other homes. This chapter also belongs to a period of religious conflict that changes how communities talk about magic. As Protestant reform spreads, and as Catholic authorities respond, both sides emphasize discipline, purity, and clear boundaries between acceptable practice and forbidden practice. Older folk customs that once sat comfortably beside church life become targets. People who once used charms or spoken blessings at home find that those habits draw scrutiny. Women often preserve these customs because they manage births, sickness, and death inside the home. A charm spoken over a child with a fever becomes suspect under new religious pressures. A bundle of herbs hung near a door becomes suspect. A broom used in a household cleansing ritual becomes suspect. Officials treat these domestic acts as evidence of spiritual rebellion. The broom rider legend benefits because it offers a clean and frightening picture of the home turning against the church. A woman uses a household tool to break rules that clergy claim come from God. That story fits the needs of institutions trying to enforce uniform belief. Then the story crosses the Atlantic with people who carry fear as part of their luggage. A ship leaves an English port and pushes into rough water. The deck is crowded with barrels, rope, and bundles wrapped in cloth. Families huddle under canvas. A woman grips a railing while the ship pitches. She has a small broom because everyone needs one in tight quarters. People sweep spilled grain, mud tracked from the deck, ash from a small cooking fire. The broom stays close because space stays scarce. These travelers bring more than tools. They bring sermons they heard, pamphlets they read, and stories they shared in the dark. They bring a legal imagination shaped by European witch hunts. When they land in New England, they build towns where the church and the court overlap. They build a culture where neighbors watch neighbors as part of religious duty. In such places, private conflicts become public quickly. In a Puritan household, domestic order becomes a moral issue. Floors are swept, beds are made. Children are kept quiet during prayer. A wife who fails to maintain order risks criticism that goes beyond mess. The criticism touches salvation, reputation, and a husband's standing in the church. Women carry the burden of those expectations, and women also carry the blame when the household falls short. That burden grows heavier when the community faces threats, harsh winters, crop failure, disease, raids, and political uncertainty. People sleep with muskets close. They bury children in frozen ground. They watch their stores run low. Under those pressures, fear finds targets in the usual places, among people with few protectors, people who argue, people who ask for charity, people who refuse to submit. Women accused in New England often fit patterns familiar from Europe: poverty, isolation, quarrels, and reputations shaped by rumor. The Salem crisis in 1692 brings these dynamics into sharp focus. A group of young girls shows strange behavior, convulsions, shouting, complaints of pinching and biting sensations, claims of seeing figures. Ministers and magistrates treat these claims as evidence of witchcraft. The legal system accepts testimony about unseen harm and unseen presence. Accusations spread fast. People name neighbors. Neighbors name others. The jail fills. Interrogations demand that suspects explain how they performed harm and how they met with other witches. Some confess. Some refuse. Confession can spare a life in some cases, because authorities focus on the unrepentant as the most dangerous. Confession also feeds the story. A confessor supplies details about meetings, animals, and travel because the interrogators expect those details. The European law that includes broom flight exists in the background even when specific testimony focuses on other elements. The cultural image of witches traveling at night and gathering in secret helps judges and ministers explain what is happening. It helps them argue that a coordinated enemy operates within the community. The broom rider remains part of that larger mental picture, even when a transcript does not mention a broom. The broom also returns here as a symbol of women's domestic identity. A woman accused in New England may still be the woman who sweeps the floor, who tends the hearth, who keeps food from spoiling, who washes linens, who attends births, who sits by a sickbed. When she becomes accused, the story turns her domestic role into a mask. Witnesses claim she came to their bedside at night. Witnesses claim she entered their house without opening the door. Witnesses claim she left marks. The domestic sphere becomes a battleground in the mind of the community. The broom, already tied to the threshold and the hearth, becomes one more piece of that mental equipment. Even when people do not say broom aloud, they picture a witch moving through household space with ease because they already associate witches with women and women with household tools. Men in authority use written accounts and sermons to frame these crises, and those texts circulate. They connect New England fears to European fears. They reinforce the idea that witches form networks. They reinforce the idea that witches travel at night. They reinforce the idea that women's bodies and women's habits can hide secret sin. Through these channels, the broom rider image stays alive. It survives because it remains useful in moral teaching and in popular storytelling. After the Salem executions end and doubt grows, the imagery still remains. A community can reject a court's actions while still keeping the mental picture of the witch. The picture offers a way to talk about chaos, social conflict, and fear of women who speak and act outside expected roles. Back in Europe, skepticism rises in some circles during the late 17th and 18th centuries. Some courts demand stronger evidence. Some elites grow embarrassed by earlier excesses. Yet the broom rider image continues in popular culture because it has become a shorthand. It conveys a category of person in one stroke. It also allows humor. A tavern can tell a story about a neighbor on a broom and get a laugh, while still reinforcing the idea that certain women are dangerous. The humor sharpens the cruelty because it makes accusation feel like a game until it becomes a death sentence. Women feel this in daily life. They learn to manage their anger in public. They learn to avoid quarrels with powerful neighbors. They learn to accept poor treatment, to avoid suspicion. They learn to keep their herb knowledge quiet. They learn to hide their small rituals. A broom stays by the door, and it becomes a reminder that the smallest domestic detail can be turned into a weapon. A police constable stands at the edge of a fairground and watches a man sell pamphlets from a wooden tray. The seller keeps his voice loud and steady. He tells the crowd about a witch who rode out at night. He describes a broom. He describes a meeting. He describes a confession. People lean in close, then step back and laugh as if they have heard the story before. The constable knows the mood has changed. A century earlier, a magistrate might have ordered arrests based on the same claims. In this fairground, the claims land as entertainment. The seller counts coins and keeps talking, because the crowd keeps buying. A young boy holds the pamphlet with both hands and studies the crude picture on the cover. A woman with long hair sits on a broom above a roof. The lines are rough. The image still lands fast. It does not need careful reading. The boy folds the paper and tucks it into his coat as if it matters. In courtrooms across parts of Europe and the American colonies, the legal appetite for witchcraft cases shrinks over time, and the change begins in practical steps. Judges start demanding clearer proof. Ministers argue with each other about visions and dreams. Officials worry about disorder when accusations spread too far and start hitting families with influence. A town that executes too many people loses labor, loses stability, and invites backlash. Some communities reach a point where they look at the wreckage and decide they have had enough. A few judges refuse to accept spectral claims. A few juries refuse to convict. A few officials shift charges away from witchcraft and toward fraud or public disturbance when someone claims magical powers. The shift does not arrive as a clean break. It arrives as hesitation, as a delayed warrant, as a clerk who writes less, as a magistrate who prefers a fine over a hanging. For the accused, the difference means life. A woman who once would have been marched to a stake or a gallows walks out of a cell and returns home with a ruined reputation and a body weakened by confinement. She still has to sweep her floor. She still has to face neighbors. She still has to live with the knowledge that the same village could turn again if fear rises. As formal prosecutions decline, the witch figure moves into culture in a new way, and the broom travels with her because it already has a strong outline. The broom works in a drawing, in a quick carving, in a stage prop, and later in a photograph and film. It tells the viewer what kind of character they are looking at in a single second. Artists who want to sell prints keep using the broom because buyers recognize it. Theater companies keep using it because it reads clearly from the back row. A comic writer keeps using it because it gives the audience a familiar joke. The broom becomes a tool of shorthand, and shorthand survives even after people stop believing the full story. That survival also suits authorities. A state can reject witch trials and still permit mockery of witches on stage. Mockery helps distance a society from its recent violence. It gives people a way to treat the old fear as foolishness, which saves face for families who once participated in accusations. It also pushes the pain of earlier victims out of the public mind, because laughter makes it easier to move on without accountability. Domestic life changes in the 18th and 19th centuries, and those changes reshape the broom's place in the home and in the imagination. Urban households grow. City streets fill with soot and mud from horses, carts, and factories. Cleaning becomes constant work. Brooms become more standardized as manufacturers produce them in larger quantities. A broom in a shop window becomes a common sight. A woman carrying a broom becomes a common sight. At the same time, popular media expands. Cheap prints, satirical cartoons, and later magazines circulate widely. A cartoonist can draw a politician as a witch to suggest deceit or corruption, and the audience understands the insult because the broom makes the meaning immediate. A cartoonist can draw a scolding older woman as a witch for a cheap laugh, and the audience understands the joke because older women have long carried the stereotype of the dangerous neighbor. These images do not need court records. They draw on the memory of older stories while stripping away the legal consequences. The witch becomes a mask people use in arguments about power and gender, and the broom becomes the object that makes the mask readable. Halloween traditions expand and change in the 19th century and into the 20th, especially in places where immigrant communities bring older seasonal customs and blend them with new commercial habits. Families carve vegetables and later pumpkins. Children wear costumes and knock on doors. Storekeepers decorate windows to attract buyers. A witch silhouette becomes a practical decoration because it can be cut from paper and taped to glass. It can be printed on a poster. It can be painted on a sign. The broom gives the silhouette its most distinctive line. A hat and a broom tell the whole story even when the face stays blank. That simplicity makes the broomstick witch spread across neighborhoods in a way that more complex images cannot. Once it becomes a seasonal decoration, it becomes part of childhood memory. A child sees it in October year after year, and the association sets in before the child learns anything about the historical deaths that built the image. Early film and stage entertainment lock the broomstick witch into a new form. Costume designers use long skirts, pointed hats, and exaggerated noses because those shapes read well on stage and on screen. They add a broom because it gives the actor something to hold and something to mount. It turns a static costume into an action. A performer can swing a broom onto a shoulder, stomp across a stage, and get laughs. A performer can sit on it and be lifted by wires and get gasps. The broom becomes a piece of theater equipment as much as a symbol. When film studios make fantasy stories, they use the same cues because audiences already recognize them. In the late 1930s, audiences watch a witch with green skin appear on screen in a major film, and the broomstick image becomes part of mass entertainment for generations. The character's voice, costume, and posture leave a deep imprint. People leave the theater talking about the witch because she feels vivid and because the broom gives her a clear physical relationship to the world. She does not float like a ghost. She rides like a person using an object, which makes the fantasy feel tangible. As the 20th century continues, television and advertising keep the broomstick witch in constant circulation. A cartoon can draw a witch on a broom in a single frame and move on. A cereal box can show a witch stirring a pot and leaning on a broom. A Halloween candy wrapper can print the silhouette again and again. Children absorb the image through repetition. Adults use it as a seasonal signal. The broom becomes part of the visual language of autumn in many places. This creates a strange split. The broomstick witch becomes cute in some contexts and menacing in others. A children's cartoon gives her a silly laugh and a clumsy landing. A horror poster gives her sharp teeth and a dark sky. Both versions use the same broom because the broom supplies instant recognition. The object does not care what story it serves. It stays stable while tone changes around it. During these same decades, real people start to reclaim the word witch for spiritual practice, for identity, and for political statement. Some build new religious movements rooted in older folklore and ritual ideas. Some practice folk magic within families and pass it quietly from one person to another. Some take inspiration from pre-Christian traditions, seasonal festivals, and nature-based spirituality. In these communities, the broom returns as a household tool with ritual use. People make their own brooms from birch, straw, or other materials. They bind them with cord. They hang them near doors. They use them in simple cleansing rituals that involve sweeping a room before a ceremony or sweeping near a threshold as a symbolic act. These practices remain physical. A person moves a broom across a floor. A person tidies a space. A person marks the start of a gathering by cleaning. The broom also appears in wedding customs, where couples jump a broom to mark a marriage in a public and memorable act. The jump is literal. Feet lift and land. Friends clap. Photographs capture the moment. The broom holds meaning because it connects domestic life, work, and a chosen ritual identity. This reclamation creates a second split in the broom's meaning. In popular entertainment, the broom often signals a female villain or a comic outsider. In modern spiritual communities, the broom can signal belonging and practice. The public may not see the difference because the same object sits at the center, yet the behavior around it changes. A person who identifies as a witch today may own a broom that never leaves the floor. and they may also enjoy the old image of flight as a symbol of freedom. Another person may reject the flight image while still keeping the broom as a tool for cleaning and ceremony. These choices play out in ordinary spaces, apartments, backyards, small gatherings, bookstores, and community centers. People talk about it in plain language. They describe what they do and why they do it. They also talk about the history with anger because the old accusations killed people. The broom carries that tension because it sits in the center of both the violence and the later reclamation. Museums, historians, and educators add another layer by returning to the records and explaining how the image formed. They point to court transcripts, to woodcuts, to sermons, to pamphlets, to the social pressures that made accusations spread. They describe torture and coercion. They describe how judges and clergy shaped confessions. They describe how poison fears and medical ignorance turned herb knowledge into suspicion. They describe how domestic objects became legal evidence. This work changes how some people view the broomstick witch, especially adults who learn the scale of the violence for the first time. A person who once saw the broomstick witch as a harmless decoration reads testimony about women executed after forced confessions and starts to see the image differently. They might still decorate for Halloween. They might still enjoy fantasy stories. They also carry a sharper awareness that the image grew from real pain. That awareness does not erase the icon. It adds weight to it in the mind, and it changes the way some people tell the story to their children. The broom survives as the central prop because it ties together the core elements that have always driven the myth. It ties witchcraft to women and to the home. It ties witchcraft to motion and travel. It ties witchcraft to secrecy, because a broom can sit in plain sight without raising alarm. It also ties witchcraft to play, because children naturally treat long sticks as things to ride. That connection to play matters more than people admit. A child who runs through a yard straddling a broom learns the physical posture of the icon before learning any theology or history. The posture embeds itself in the body. Later, when that child sees a witch in a cartoon, the child recognizes the posture and laughs. That bodily recognition keeps the icon alive across generations without any need for belief. A costume store in late October provides a clean view of how the image functions in the present. Plastic brooms hang on hooks beside hats and capes. Some brooms come apart into 3 pieces for easy packaging. Some have glitter on the handle. Some have orange straw. A customer picks one up and swings it through the air to test its weight. The customer smiles because it feels like a prop, light and simple. In the same store, a cleaning aisle in another part of town sells sturdy household brooms meant for kitchens and sidewalks. A shopper grips a wooden handle and checks the bristles for stiffness. That shopper thinks about dirt, not witches. Both brooms share the same basic form. Their context changes their meaning. The form remains constant because it works. A broom looks like a tool and a vehicle at the same time. That dual identity keeps it useful for stories. At a modern Halloween parade, a woman in a witch costume walks down a main street. She carries a broom over her shoulder. Children wave. A marching band plays. A volunteer hands out candy. The woman smiles and keeps walking. A few spectators take photos. The scene stays bright and ordinary. Behind that scene sits a long history of accusations, forced confessions, and executions that built the icon in the first place. Most spectators do not think about the courts or the burnings while they clap. The parade still depends on the same object that once appeared in trial records as proof of criminal flight. The object has moved from evidence to decoration. It has moved from terror to play. It has moved from persecution to profit. The broom survives every shift because it remains easy to recognize and easy to use.